Throughout the month of May, CBS News New York is celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, a time to honor the history, culture, resilience, and contributions of what's being called the fastest growing racial or ethnic group in the United States. Between the years 2000 to 2019, the Asian American population increased by 81%. That's up from 10.5 million people to 19.9 million people. This is according to census data analyzed by the Pew Research Center. By the year 2060, that number is predicted to rise to more than 35 million people, according to the same census data. Asian Americans have been part of the American experience since the 1800s, but many say they are still underrepresented and not fully part of the American conversation. Joining me now to discuss this is Frank Wu, president of Queens College, the City University of New York. He is an author, legal scholar, and the first person of Asian descent to lead the college. We welcome you, President Frank Wu. Thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, gosh. So, first of all, let's talk about, God, how do I say this? We're programmed to think that there are, when we hear Asian American, we think we understand. Pacific Islander, we're not sure that we understand. Can you just let's just set this conversation off with, who are we talking about?
Right. So it's about 20 million people, and it ranges from those who are sixth generation Americans. There are even Asian Americans whose ancestors came over on the Mayflower. When I say that, people are puzzled. It's because of mixed marriages. There are people who are Anglo-Asian, for example, and there are adoptees. These are folks from 4 dozen different nations and from the Pacific Islands. So those were combined because of the federal government. In the 1970s, they created this category following student activism of the 60s that coined the term Asian American. Before that, the concept didn't even exist.
Let's talk about your own personal story. Your parents coming to the U.S. from Taiwan. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And how did that shape who you are?
I tell our students here in Queens, the Worldsboro, that my family is their family. It's the same story of newcomers. My parents arrived in the early 1960s on these shores as scholarship students, so I know I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for the promise and the opportunity of American education. I was born here, the first in my family to emerge in the United States as a native-born citizen, and I grew up in Detroit, the Motor City, a magnificent wreck of a place, but I'm a New Yorker who just had to find my way here over time.
Talk about your parents' generation versus your generation. How behavior, goal setting, how did that influence how you became who you are throughout? I mean, your work at Howard University, Hastings Law School in California, Queens College, I'm sure I'm forgetting things, all of the stuff that you've done.
I just gave a speech this morning for Heritage Month where I talked about the sacrifices my parents made. Like so many who came to this nation, they gave everything for the next generation. They believed in the American dream. And I know if it weren't for the high standards that they set, that I wouldn't be here. Yet sometimes I wonder if the strategies that worked in a different time, a different place for a different generation, if they're still good for this era. I'll give you an example. When I was in high school, so this is a while ago, I'm 55 this year. When I was in high school, I was elected to student government. That was shocking. And my parents said, you must quit immediately. You have to study or you won't get into a good college. Little did they know as immigrants that participating in student government would help you get into a good college and would give you a much needed skill set. Their attitude was just study. Study all the time. Don't do anything else. Now, I appreciate that. It is important to study. But now that I have this role, I recognize participating in student government, embracing the fullness of human life, of the American experience, that's so important. I'll give you an example of something else I had to learn. My parents, they had Asian cultural traditions. That includes filial piety, really obeying your parents, deference to one's elders, following tradition. And there are certain ways that you're polite that maybe don't work so well here. I'll give you an example. Many East Asian cultures and many other cultures, you don't look someone in the eye. You don't look someone who is your social superior in the eye. You kind of look at the ground, or you look down because that's deferential. That's showing your respect. Well, in America, if you're not looking someone in the eye, there's something a little wrong. They don't trust you. They think that's suspicious. So I had to learn. Not only is it okay, it's expected. And if I'm going to work the room as president of a college, I need to look people in the eye. I need to shake their hands, slap them on the back, and have the sort of social graces that are expected here that my parents didn't teach me because it's a different set of norms where they grew up.
There are the words diversity, inclusion, equity, but what about the one-on-one understanding, as you say? Do we look in someone's eyes? Do we say, tell me about your family culture? You know, come over to my house for our holiday that is special. How do we do this? How do we do this so we understand and as a whole we are a better people?
It's an ongoing process. You know, I'm ashamed to admit this now, but I was embarrassed of my parents. Now, I know all teenagers are a little bit embarrassed of their own parents, but when you're the child of newcomers and your parents, they have accents, they eat funny foods, right? You watch television, they don't quite laugh at the right time because sometimes they miss the joke and you have to explain it. If there's a dispute with the phone company, there's this awkward role reversal, whereas the kid, you're the interpreter for your own adult parents. And when you go to school, you know that when you make friends, your friends' parents, they're not going to be your parents' friends. So like many, and I know this is true even to this day, even when we celebrate multiculturalism, you are maybe a little uncomfortable with your own kith and kin, with your own extended family, because your grandparents, when you bring someone home from school to meet them, they can't really communicate. Yet something has changed. You see, when I was a kid, you had to fit in. There was no choice. Nobody celebrated diversity. Multiculturalism wasn't even a word that had been invented. It was all about assimilation. Do you copy your social superiors? Do you imitate them? When you do that, you know you're always inferior. Your parents, they also have to copy their social superiors. That's why it's great to be in New York City now, because now you can keep your faith, you can eat your food, and people won't mock it when you go to the school cafeteria. You can be yourself as you choose to define it. And that's what's changed. And exactly as you suggest, when you introduce your cultural traditions to your friends, you create a new America because you share, you mix and match, and cultures change over time. And that's what's great about being here.
We can't have this conversation without speaking about the spike in violence, including murder against Asian Americans in New York. How do we get through that? How can we help?
People can stop being bystanders and be upstanders. You know, it's been terrible. When it first started, some folks would say to me, oh, come on, this is just random. You don't know that this is racial. But then we saw a pattern, viral videos. And, you know, it starts with someone on the sidewalk. They shout those racial slurs that I know, those taunts, the common.
You had that, right, as a child?
That's right.
You were.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what those words are. I won't repeat them, but those words have no power over me. The violence is not new, but the awareness is new. And actually, I'm given a little bit of hope because I went to a rally about a year ago in downtown Flushing, transformed by Asian immigrants. And I looked out, I'd never seen this. Hundreds of Asian people, young and old, newcomers, native born, all walks of life, holding signs, ready to march. They were going to stand up and speak out like Americans for their rights. I've never seen so many people who are white, who are black, who are Latino, who are Jewish, not Asian Americans, standing alongside Asian Americans saying, this is wrong, we will stand with you. That was unprecedented in the best way.
To hear about your hope and confidence and just encouraging us to get involved, all of us, knowing right from wrong. I appreciate your time, President Frank Wu of Queens College, and just thank you for sharing your perspective personally. And
Thank you.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, and I'm sure your students are very lucky to have you there. Thank you. If you'd like more information about Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, go to our website, cbsnewyork.com.